should the first pullers of a lead out train focus more on slightly longer sprints in 30 seconds to 60 seconds compared to the last guys? I wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to kind of talk about building our ideal lead out trains and then kind of talk about how those athletes would have to train differently. So I know that we hear about like Renshaw and Cavendish from back in the day, or Michael Morkow and then Cavendish these days. But and we hear about these like, these perfect lead outs with these genetic specimens that are basically perfect at doing 57 seconds and perfect at doing 23 seconds, but most of us don't deal with that sort of like level of genetic predisposition and proficiency. So instead we deal with the folks that are on our club or our friends that we are kind of piecing together. But once again, like we've talked about plenty of times, you don't have to be some genetic world-class sprinter to be a sprinter or to be a lead out person or to be a time trialist. You can choose to be what you want and train. And within a realm of reasonability, you can really achieve a lot of success. So with that said, Amber, this is really about you. Let's talk about building this lead out because since you're a pro road racer, let's talk about building this like lead out team, but then let's also talk about like how you would train them, how the athletes should train depending on their position in that lead out train.
Well, first of all, a 30-second sprint is a really, really, really long sprint. I wouldn't almost even call that a sprint. So a 30-second max effort is not quite a sprint. A sprint is more, you're talking about 5, 10, maybe 20 seconds. 20 seconds is a long sprint. Mm-hmm. So if we're talking about a true sprint, massive, maximal effort, it's quite short. So when you're thinking, if we were to just theoretically identify a long, flat stretch of road with no obstacles, no gradient, no corners, and we were just going to do a lead out, then in theory, what you want is a long enough train to take control somewhere between 2K and 1K out. And then enough riders.
How long is that in terms of like a race, Amber? 2K to 1K. That could be pretty long. In this case, like a flat race.
Yeah. Really, yeah. I mean, it all depends, right? Like, mm-hmm. So I'm not going to do the math in my head at the moment, but
sure.
In real life, I mean, where you start the lead out depends a lot on the course and what's happening in the race, right? The goal with initiating the lead out is to take control of the front. And once you take control of the front, that's it. You are committed. Now your job is to control the line, keep anybody from coming around you, which means that you have to go fast enough to discourage or make impossible any attacks, and make it so hard for anybody to come up even next to you, let alone around you, that people either can't or won't. And in real life, that is an art form because you don't want to do more than is necessary to maintain control of the front. And sometimes in real life, not in our theoretical world, but in real life, the rest of the peloton is usually happy. If there is a team that is willing to go to the front and take control, the rest of the peloton is usually happy to let them do that, unless there's another really strong team that also wants control. But in our idealized world, you'll take over the front at some point in those last couple of kilometers. The first person to take a pull on a lead out, their pull will be longer than the last person to take a pull before the sprint. But it's not necessarily going to be 60 seconds would be really, really long. I would think less in terms of time and more in terms of distance. So it's more like you wouldn't want anybody pulling more than 500 meters if you had a choice. More like 300 meters is better. And then when you're getting down to the last one or two people before your sprinter, it's going short because those two people are really getting down to from what might be more of a kilo effort to more of a sprint effort. So from a 30-second effort down to a 20, 10, 15-second effort. I see Chad nodding. Chad, you want to jump in on this one too?
Oh, no, not at all. I'm just agreeing.
Okay, good. Mm-hmm. I'm on track. Yeah. So in theory, as you peel off one rider after another off the front, each pull should be shorter and faster. So the whole train should be accelerating leading into that final sprint. Now, ideal and theoretical never happens in real life. So what actually usually happens is you have a rider at the front who is strong enough to pull the entire train to the front, take over the front, and establish control. That rider needs to be the kind of rider who can read the race, who's resilient. They may end up having to pull. I mean, I was often in that position, and there were times when I would get to the front, people were happy to let us take over, and I could do a standard 500-meter pull and be done. Other times, things got hairy, and I had to continue a pull for 2 or 3 laps because we had lost somebody. And so you have to be willing to read the situation and adjust what's going on the fly. So there's not really a good formula to say, if you're the first lead out person, here's what you do and here's how you train. That said, you do need to be able to train your anaerobic system really, really well, because you need to be able to throttle it and really throttle it in a way that is going to discourage the heck out of everybody around you from wanting to come around you. The earlier person in a lead out, so one of the people to take over the lead out train early on, that person also needs to be easy to follow through a group. As you get back toward the final sprinter, those folks are going to may need to navigate some tighter, twistier maneuvers through the field. But that first person, you're leading a whole team, maybe of 5, 6, 10 athletes, depending on how many people are on your team. And you have to be thinking about, is this a line not only that the person behind me can take, but that 3 people behind me can take? Is this going to be a line that my sprinter can follow? And the way that you're communicating through that lead out is from the back to the front. So the sprinter is talking to the person in front of them, is talking to the person in front of them, is talking to the person in front of them. So the person on the front is getting information from the rider behind them, but also at the same time so they're taking information of what they can see in front of them, but also they're listening to their teammates to understand what's happening behind them. So if there's a surge coming and they can't see it because it's not in their peripheral vision yet, the person behind them will let them know. They can throttle it up again. So that first person, it's not a 30-second or 60-second flat out sprint. It's really ramping it up just enough to take control and being ready at any moment to have to absolutely throttle it to avoid getting swarmed or to get your team into a different position. And then as you go back through the line, it's really just about shortening those pulls and getting the speed up. Sometimes even that last lead out person right before dropping off the sprinter, something might happen and they may end up having to take a 500-meter pull, instead of a 200-meter pull. And their only goal is to drop the sprinter off in the ideal position. And they just need to make that happen, period. Yeah. No matter what's going on around them. And that can get really hairy, as we definitely saw during the tour this year.
There's also, I think, a myth, right, Amber, that exists where you just think that, like, oh, well, since this person's been waiting in the draft, I'm saying in air quotes, that last person, they just really have to focus on that one hard effort. But they've been working extremely hard just to stay on that train. So it's like, an effective lead out train, everybody should feel like they're all working hard, or else the field is going to come around you. So yes. if you're not working hard, Chad, do you have any thoughts on this as far as like training an ideal lead out train? I know that you were more, you did a whole lot of racing in this sort of environment with sprint trains and such back in the day.
Nothing really to pile onto what Amber's already said. I do have particular recollections where a lot of the motivation came from the rider who was behind me. So I basically, each rider in the line, whether it's 3 riders, 5, 6, whatever, 1, is relying on it. Not only the information from the rider behind you, but the motivation. Because I think of one rider in particular who was trying to drive home how fast I need to go, how hard I need to work to be that particular person in the lead out. And all he ever said was faster. Never said, just said faster over and over and over. And every time I thought, I can't possibly go faster, he would yell with conviction, faster. And I'd find a way. And I'd go a little faster until, I basically blew myself up, and then it's out of my hands. I swing off and the next rider comes through. But it just kind of woke me up to the fact that hard enough never exists. You're never going as fast as you can when it comes to a lead out. And you'll know this because you'll either get swarmed or you'll blow up. But in any case, the decision will handle itself.
What do you think about this, Nate? Yeah.
I have a question for Amber. For the second to last, so the last lead out person, and they're dropping their sprinter off at, would you say 300 meters maybe?
Oh, no, 200 meters.
Okay.
maybe even 100 meters to go.
Are they sprinting at the very end of their pull? Are they out of the saddle sprinting as hard as they can to get maximum speed for themselves at that drop-off point?
Usually, yes. But there are a variety of scenarios in which that may not be true. If it's a downhill sprint, they might want to do a seated sprint. That is where you will have a high degree of communication with your sprinter. So if I'm dropping off our team sprinter and I'm the last lead out person, my sprinter needs to know if I'm going to jump out of the saddle standing or if I'm going to start seated and get up, or if I'm going to stay seated. And at that point, basically what you do is the drop-off point for your sprinter is your finish line. So you get there as if you were trying to win the race by getting to that line. And then it's up to your sprinter to decide when and where they come around you. So I'm not going to swing off if I'm the last lead out person. I'm just going to go as if I were trying to do a race winning sprint, but my finish line is at 200 to go or 150 to go instead of at the actual finish line. And then the sprinter is in my draft, and they're probably going to drop off and do the little slingshot, the sprinter's gap move off from my acceleration. But if the faster I'm moving, if they're accelerating in my draft, the faster they're able to accelerate, and the faster the quicker they're able to hit a top speed when they finally do come out of my draft and come around me. So yeah, it's whether you're seated or standing is a question of terrain and course, but it's really your job is to pretend your finish line is wherever you're dropping off your sprinter, and you just everything you've got, emptying the tank.
I would like to lead John out at an Air Center crit.
Yes.
That'd be pretty cool for a video.
So fun.
It'd be really fun.
I like the power box or something, or closer.
What do you mean power box?
There's like a box that we used to sprint from with Pete.
Yeah. Yeah, I would need something.
Is that too far out?
That would be even a little close for me. I think I'm better with a longer sprint. I can snap, but then I can hold really well. But if you're talking about like a short sprint, my snap is still not substantial enough against others. But
I'm pretty sure no one's getting around me. But really though, if I go from if it's like a 45 second, no one in the Air Center, because there's not real teams, are probably going to come around at 45 seconds, like the backside of that thing.
Yeah, Nate. So this is a good example. Like Nate has a really clear indication of what he's best at in terms of like durations and efforts. And Nate's really good for those durations somewhere around a minute. Like very, very good. I can't come around it.
Those are so painful.
53 seconds.
Yeah. and if you can stay in the draft, then man, you're going to be at a really high speed for quite a slingshot, particularly on a course like that where you can just pedal through everything,
Not that last corner. Whew, I've clipped a pedal there.
Okay.
Because if you're going, that's another thing though, on sometimes a whole race, you'll be okay. But if you're going at 34, you just bank a little more and you can't pedal through that corner. So that corners are, you're leaning over more as you're going faster and you can't pedal through it. So it's not safe to assume you can make it. If you made it the whole race,
adjust
you can
your
make
line.
it at the end.
You adjust your line because of that speed, and instead of because that turn likes to naturally force you. Yeah, it likes to naturally force you to make a tighter apex there coming out. And you also feel like you don't want to go wide in the middle of a turn because you're like, oh, somebody might go underneath you. But if a corner naturally tightens at the end, you can, in many cases, people can try to dive the inside. But as long as you have momentum and you have relative position on them, you can close them off and they really have to slow down. So it's really, instead of about going wide in the end, it's about letting yourself drift a little wider in the middle there. And then you don't have to tighten it up quite as much. It's a good thing. I know that's very specific to a turn. One thing that I wanted to mention with this is that it's not like one person just works on their 15-second sprint. One person works on their 10 and another works on their 5. It's about working on aerobic capabilities and anaerobic capabilities as they relate to sprinting. So it's really about working on a person's ability to be able to put out high amounts of power through over that 4-minute duration, that 3-minute duration, 2-minute, whatever it is. Because that's really pulling on the strings that you need. You'll see a lot of intervals that we have where it starts hard and then it drops you down, like in the crit plan, to where you're still above threshold, but you started way above threshold, then you sit at VO2, or even the opposite, where you start out of VO2 and then you finish strong, have one in the middle of it and you continue. That's why following a structured plan is super important. And that's why, like, it would be foolish of a person even like Cavendish to just train his sprint and that's it. He doesn't do that. He trains a whole lot of stuff to be able to hold on to that lead out train for as long as he needs to and do everything he needs to before that lead out train for the whole race. So
right, it usually ends up feeling like a series of sprints, right? Because you are coming out of a corner, you're having to decelerate into a corner, you're having to accelerate around somebody who's blowing up. It's very rare that you have clean air all the way through a lead out. It's just not going to happen. So yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Nate.
No, go ahead. I interrupted you.
Nope, go for it. I'm done.
Okay, two things. First, Cavendish said before, like, everyone thinks sprinting is just like top power, but he said it was like you got to hold 500 watts for 3 minutes and then sprint, and that's very different than just getting on the road and sprinting.
Yeah.
And then
Sorry. Meanwhile, all of us average Joes are like, well, and Janes were like, well, I hit 1200 watts. My peak power is this. It's like, who cares about your peak power, right? Like Cav was saying there is like, what matters is what you can do in non-ideal circumstances.
Yeah. When you're gassed, how hard can you sprint?
Yeah.
And Amber, when people are peeling off for like, how do you decide, how do you communicate? Do you communicate, or does the person in the back just decide when they should then take over? Like, especially for the last person, do they flip their elbow when they're like about to give up? Or is it just I guess the last person might be a position on the road, but before that, what is their communication, or do you just feel like they're slowing down so you go?
Yeah, it depends. This is our answer for everything. It depends. But usually what'll happen, especially in a crit or a race where you've been able to preview the finish as a team, you'll identify landmarks where, okay, I'm going to take over with so many laps to go. So-and-so is going to take over at this point. And then when you get down within that last 500 meters or kilometer, then it's, okay, I'm taking you through this corner and then this person is going. So using course characteristics is a really good way of doing that because that can make it easier. But again, everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the face, right? So you might have a great plan and then realize that you have to change it on the fly. And in that case, what usually ends up happening is, let's say I was supposed to pull to that corner, but I can tell I'm going to blow up before then. I'll give an elbow and yell off so that I don't get in the way and the person behind me knows, okay, I got to take over sooner than I thought. Or if I think I feel fine and the person behind me can tell I'm slowing down, because you can feel it, that the person behind me can actually feel it better than I can. They'll yell off to me, which is instruction for me to get off, and then they'll come around me. So it really depends on what's happening, and it could go either way. The communication can go either way, but usually it's the rider who's behind, the second rider in line, who's going to make the call of, okay, you were supposed to go to that corner, but you're slowing down and I can feel it and we need to keep the speed up. So get out of the way. I'm coming through. And then that person then has to make that resilient choice of, okay, my pull's going to be longer than I thought it was. And so on down the line. So yeah, it just got to make the call in the moment.
The other thing I've seen Mike's bikes do to me is when they switch people in the lead out train, they actually it accelerates. And that little jump, that causes breaks in, it makes it harder for everyone else. Do you try to do the acceleration, or is that just an overego person when you switch off in the lead out train?
Versus keeping a stable pace, you're saying, Nate?
Yeah, exactly, like a slow ratchet up where it just keeps getting faster and faster. It's like one person pulls off and it's like boom, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I just did a mini sprint to try to keep up with it. And then there's gaps behind that happen, they have to close. And
probably a little bit over ear. So again, ideal scenario, the overall speed of the entire train will increase toward the sprint, but increase gradually without surges. Because the surge will hurt everybody behind that person too in the lead out train. So you don't really want to do that. But when you're talking about trade-offs, you're better off keeping the speed high and keeping people from attacking you. And if that means that you surge a little bit when you pull through, the cost of the surge to the people in your team's lead out is lower than the cost would be if someone were to attack you. So you're better off surging a little bit and keeping the speed high. And again, perfect is theoretical. It's almost never going to happen. I don't think the surge is on purpose to hurt the rest of the field because, again, it is hurting the people behind them, but it's a cost-benefit analysis, right? They're better off keeping the speed high and accidentally surging than pulling through too slowly, dropping the speed, and having to bring it back up again.
Maybe they should have pulled through earlier, the riders behind them in that case, right, Amber? before that speed had a chance to drop, if that was the case, if it was high and dropping. That's a mistake that I've made. Pete tried to lead me out at Air Center once, and we have this in our race analysis. You can go onto our YouTube channel. That's just youtube.com/TrainerRoad. And you can see we have playlists of race analysis that you can watch. And Pete was leading me out, and it was great. And he slowed down, and just me being in, race brain mode, I should have came around him as soon as his momentum started to slow. And instead I hesitated for a second, and boy, isn't that the story with me? I've done that plenty of times. So,
but other people went, right? So they were on your wheel. They felt the slow down and they went.
And
then you were, you
and
pretty much led, or you're a 2-person lead out for them.
Exactly. I was fighting for peanuts after that. So, but yeah, it's interesting because I think that we have this idealized version of what a sprint looks like, but very rarely is it ever that at the pro level, let alone at the amateur level. So,
it's
I just wish Chad was
really
still
messy.
racing. I want to be in a lead out train with Chad. He's such a stable wheel and such like a savvy captain. It'd be fun. So those are my dreams, Chad. Don't crush my dreams. Come back and race.
If you like this video, make sure you give us a thumbs up.
If you didn't like this video, you can give it a thumbs down, but let us know what you would have done differently in the comments below.
If you want to see more of these videos, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you want to become a faster cyclist, check out TrainerRoad.com.
Do it.